In the pre-dawn quiet of a shared courthouse parking lot, an ordinary Tuesday was shattered by an act of casual brutality. At precisely 6:30 a.m., Officer Marcus Sullivan, a figure cloaked in the authority of his badge, delivered a chilling lesson in contempt. "Move it, courthouse trash. Know your place." The words, heavy with disdain, preceded the deliberate tilt of his coffee cup. Lukewarm liquid cascaded onto the shoulder of a black woman, soaking her expensive coat, a dark stain spreading against the fabric as it dripped onto the cold asphalt. She stood, unflinching, the pooling coffee reflecting the dim morning light, and simply asked for his badge number. Sullivan's laughter, harsh and unrepentant, echoed in the stillness. "Good luck with that complaint, sweetheart. You're nobody." To Sullivan, she was just another entitled civilian, an anonymous face in a world he believed he controlled. He patrolled this beat for 15 years, a tenure that had, in his eyes, granted him dominion over public spaces, especially those frequented by the legal community he so clearly disdained. He saw defense attorneys, clerks, paralegals, all as courthouse workers who believed they were superior, deserving of a harsh reminder of who truly held power on the streets. He had no premonition that this single, calculated act of humiliation would not only dismantle his career, but also rip open a festering wound of systemic abuse that had been hidden in plain sight for years. 3 hours later, the illusion began to crack. In the sterile, unforgiving light of an internal affairs conference room, Officer Marcus Sullivan spun a meticulous fabrication. Across from him sat Detective Lisa Carter, a veteran investigator whose neutral expression belied a sharp, discerning mind honed by a decade of battling police misconduct. Sullivan, leaning back in his chair, arms defensively crossed, crafted a narrative of victimhood. "Look, Detective Carter, I've been walking this beat for 15 years. I know troublemakers when I see them," he began, his voice imbued with the practiced confidence of a man rarely challenged. He portrayed the woman as an aggressor, barreling through the parking lot like she owns the place, forcing him, a tired officer after a long night shift, into an accidental collision that resulted in a spilled coffee. He omitted the deliberate tracking, the calculated interception, the precise moment of the pour. In his version, he was the innocent, she, the confrontational, entitled civilian, her expensive briefcase and destination, the federal courthouse, proof of her supposed arrogance. "She was clearly looking for trouble," he insisted, his words laced with barely concealed resentment. "These people need to learn that badges matter, respect matters." His patrol partner, Officer Johnson, arrived at the scene shortly after the incident and now sat beside Sullivan, shifting uncomfortably. When Detective Carter turned to him, Johnson's voice was thin, hesitant. I arrived right after it happened," he stammered, avoiding eye contact. Sullivan was upset, said this woman had bumped into him, and then got confrontational when he tried to explain about the coffee accident. Johnson's discomfort was a subtle but potent crack in Sullivan's elaborate facade, a silent acknowledgement that the story felt hollow. Meanwhile, just blocks away, within the secure confines of the federal courthouse, an entirely different conversation was unfolding. Federal Security Chief Marcus Torres reviewed duty rosters when a casual comment from one of his guards struck a chord. "Chief, you know Judge Williams came back from her family leave today, right? 3 months caring for her mother after the surgery. She was heading in through the rear entrance around 6:30 this morning when that incident happened in the parking lot." Torres looked up sharply. "Judge Williams? Federal Judge Amara Williams?" The guard confirmed, noting the altercation with a local patrol officer over spilled coffee in the shared parking area. The universe, it seemed, had begun to align the pieces of a truth far more profound than Sullivan could ever imagine. Unaware of the seismic shift occurring, Sullivan doubled down. "I filed a counter-complaint against her for disorderly conduct and threatening a police officer. This woman needs to learn that you can't just attack cops and expect to get away with it." Detective Carter, her pen poised, questioned the aggressive framing. You're characterizing this as an attack, Officer Sullivan? Absolutely, he retorted, his voice hardening, the racial undertones now thinly veiled. She was aggressive, hostile, clearly looking to cause problems. I've seen this pattern before with these courthouse types. They think their jobs make them untouchable. He spoke of boundaries, of reminding some of these people that respect was a two-way street. Carter, with her decade of investigating police misconduct, recognized the coded language, the familiar justifications used to deflect blame. Officer Sullivan, you mentioned a pattern. Have you had other incidents with courthouse personnel? He waved it off. Nothing official, just the usual attitude problems you get from certain types of people. But Sullivan's boundaries had, in fact, left a damning trail. Detective Carter had already initiated a preliminary search of his patrol logs and incident reports. Over the past 5 years, a disturbing pattern emerged. 12 complaints filed against him, all involving black civilians, all dismissed or reduced to minor infractions, all following a remarkably similar script of accidental contact and uncooperative behavior. As Sullivan confidently asserted his narrative, painting himself as an unfairly targeted officer, he was oblivious to the high-definition security cameras from the federal courthouse that had captured every second of his deliberate act. He was unaware that his text messages from that morning were already being preserved as digital evidence, and he certainly had no clue about the true identity of the woman he had chosen to humiliate. I patrol the courthouse district every night. I know the troublemakers, he concluded, convinced his word would prevail against an anonymous civilian. Johnson, though increasingly uncomfortable, offered no direct contradiction, only a vague, unsettling comment that the woman seemed too calm, if you know what I mean, like she was planning something. Detective Carter closed her notebook. Thank you, officers. I'll need to review security footage from the area and interview the complainant. Sullivan left feeling victorious, confident in his untarnished 15-year record, assured that his story would stand. He believed he had merely put courthouse trash in her place, unaware that he had just assaulted a sitting federal judge, an act that would not only end his career within 48 hours, but also trigger a profound reckoning with systemic injustice that resonated across the entire city and beyond. The truth, as Sullivan was about to discover, possessed an unyielding power, especially when captured by unforgiving cameras and championed by a woman who held one of the most powerful positions in the federal justice system. In the very same sterile conference room where Officer Sullivan had spun his web of lies, Judge Amara Williams now sat. Her coffee-stained coat, a silent testament to Sullivan's act, hung on the back of her chair. Her testimony was not a defensive monologue, but a measured, precise, and devastatingly accurate account. At approximately 6:28 a.m., I was walking from my vehicle to the rear entrance of the federal courthouse, Amara began, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to being heard and believed in the highest courts. She detailed her parking space, F7, the one she had used for 15 years. Detective Carter noted the long tenure, a subtle clue to the complainant's deep roots in the federal system. Amara confirmed she had been working in the federal courthouse system since 2008, returning that morning after a 3-month family medical leave. The precision of her language, the legalistic cadence, immediately set her apart. This was no ordinary civilian complaint. As I approached the federal building, Officer Sullivan, badge number 4729, positioned himself directly in my path. His movements were deliberate, not coincidental. Her recall was photographic, describing the 12-ounce white disposable coffee cup with the Metro Coffee logo. The level of detail was extraordinary, a testament to her acute observational skills, honed by years of legal practice. The officer made eye contact with me from approximately 15 feet away. As I continued walking, he said, "Move it, courthouse trash. Know your place." Amara repeated Sullivan's ugly words without a flicker of emotion, allowing their sheer malice to speak for itself. He then deliberately tilted his cup and poured the contents onto my left shoulder and coat. Her certainty was unshakable. The trajectory and timing, Officer Sullivan had to extend his arm and adjust his wrist angle to ensure the liquid reached my shoulder rather than falling to the ground. The action required conscious coordination. Additionally, his positioning suggested premeditation. He had moved to intercept my path rather than maintaining his original position. Her analysis was clinical, undeniable. After the assault, Amara calmly requested and received his badge number. She noted his patrol unit, 47, and the exact timestamp on her phone, 6:31 a.m. She then recounted Sullivan's parting shot. "Good luck with that complaint, sweetheart. You're nobody." It was a phrase Detective Carter had heard countless times, a dismissive taunt from officers who believed their targets were powerless. Amara then named her witness, Dr. Michael Torres, a courthouse psychiatrist who begins his rounds early. She also confirmed the presence of security cameras at the rear entrance, noting her key card entry at 6:33 a.m. The key card detail was significant. Restricted access to the federal courthouse rear entrance was reserved for judges, senior staff, and security personnel, not typical courthouse clerks or defense attorneys. Carter realized she hadn't yet ascertained the complainant's full name. Miss Williams. Dr. Amara Williams. The title, delivered with quiet confidence, carried immense weight. Dr. Williams, where exactly do you work in the federal courthouse? Amara's response sealed the dawning realization. I work in the judicial wing, 3rd floor. I was returning to my chambers this morning to prepare for today's docket. The word chambers hung in the air, resonating with unmistakable authority. Only judges possessed chambers. A chill of recognition ran through Detective Carter. The interview continued for another half hour, Amara providing meticulous responses, devoid of anger or a desire for revenge, only a calm insistence on accountability. Her final words to Carter resonated deeply. Officer Sullivan's behavior suggests a pattern of targeting individuals he perceives as vulnerable or powerless. His language indicated racial animus, and his confidence in avoiding consequences suggests this isn't his first such incident. Justice requires accountability, Detective Carter, not just for this incident, but for the pattern it represents. As Amara left, Carter immediately began pulling security footage and cross-referencing Sullivan's patrol logs. She also noted to verify Dr. Williams' employment status. This was not just another misconduct complaint. This was an earthquake waiting to happen. Carter was about to uncover one of the most explosive police accountability cases in the city's history, a case that would reveal the woman assaulted in the parking lot as the very judge poised to oversee Sullivan's downfall. That evening, Judge Amara Williams sat in her home office, surrounded by the quiet gravitas of a distinguished legal career. Diplomas from Harvard Law, her judicial appointment certificate, and stacks of law books framed the space. Her federal judicial robes, symbols of the profound authority she wielded, hung nearby. But tonight, her focus was on Officer Marcus Sullivan's disciplinary record. 12 complaints over 5 years, all involving black civilians, all systematically dismissed or reduced. As a federal judge, Amara had access to law enforcement databases beyond the reach of most. What she found was a disturbing mosaic of systemic failure. A text from her mother, a retired civil rights activist, prompted a soft smile. Her mother's guiding principle echoed in her mind. When you have power, you use it to protect those who don't. The quiet weeks of family leave caring for her mother had reaffirmed the true north of her purpose. Returning to her research, Amara opened Sullivan's patrol logs. The pattern was undeniable. Complaints of aggressive contact during routine stops, reports of accidental spills and unintentional physical contact, each dismissed as a misunderstanding, each victim left without recourse. She reviewed specific cases. Mrs. Dorothy Jenkins, 67, whose groceries were accidentally knocked down during a jaywalking stop. Marcus Thompson, 24, whose drink was accidentally poured on him during a traffic stop. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, 35, a pediatrician, accidentally shoved against her car during a parking violation. These weren't accidents. They were a sophisticated, insidious pattern of abuse, meticulously disguised to maintain plausible deniability rooted in racially motivated harassment. Amara dialed her former mentor, retired federal judge Margaret Carter. "Margaret, it's Amara. I need to talk through something with you." For the next hour, Amara meticulously laid out the morning's events and her subsequent investigation into Sullivan's history. Judge Carter listened, recognizing the gravity. "Amara, this isn't just about your assault. This is about a pattern of civil rights violations that has been ignored for years." Amara articulated her dilemma. "How do I balance my role as a victim with my responsibilities as a federal judge?" Judge Carter's advice was clear. Recuse herself from direct judicial proceedings, but ensure the system works as it should, using her knowledge and access to bring all evidence to light. Those other victims deserve justice too. After the call, Amara drafted a detailed email to the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, outlining Sullivan's pattern and recommending a comprehensive investigation into the local police department's handling of misconduct complaints. She also contacted Dr. Michael Torres, the courthouse psychiatrist and witness, knowing his testimony would be crucial. Looking at her reflection, Amara saw a woman who had spent decades fighting for justice. Tomorrow, she would face Officer Sullivan again, but this time, the true nature of the power dynamic would be irrevocably reversed. The coffee stains on her coat, once a symbol of a petty assault, were now evidence in a federal civil rights case. The pattern of abuse was about to be exposed, and Officer Marcus Sullivan, who believed himself untouchable, was about to learn that justice, like truth, has a way of surfacing when least expected. Amara felt no anger, only a quiet determination to ensure that Sullivan's reign of abuse would end with her. Tomorrow would bring revelations that would shock everyone, except the woman who had spent her career ensuring that power could never hide from accountability. The truth began its inexorable unraveling within 48 hours, transforming Sullivan's word against a courthouse worker into an avalanche of evidence. Dr. Michael Torres, the courthouse psychiatrist, was the first domino to fall. His early arrival that Tuesday morning had placed him at the federal building's entrance, granting him a direct, unobstructed view of the entire assault. When Detective Carter contacted him, his account shattered Sullivan's fabricated story with the measured authority of someone accustomed to testifying in federal court. "I saw the whole thing," Dr. Torres recounted. "Officer Sullivan deliberately positioned himself in the woman's path. There was no collision, no accident, no stumbling. He tracked her movement across the parking lot and intercepted her specifically to pour that coffee on her shoulder. He produced a photograph taken immediately after the incident, a damning visual record. Look at his body position. He had to extend his arm and angle his wrist to ensure the liquid hit her coat rather than the ground." The photo was devastating. Sullivan's calculated posture, Amara's calm response, and the undeniable distance between them, disproving any claim of an accidental bump. Dr. Torres had unwittingly captured the precise moment that would demolish Sullivan's defense. The real breakthrough, however, arrived with the security footage from the federal courthouse. The high-definition cameras had captured every second in crystal-clear detail. What Detective Carter witnessed made her stomach churn. The footage showed Sullivan spotting Amara, deliberately altering his path to intercept her, his movements predatory and calculated. He waited for the perfect moment, then poured the coffee with undeniable intent, delivering his racist insults as he did so. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. This was a deliberate assault, motivated by racial hatred, a stark abuse of power. "Jesus Christ," Detective Carter murmured, reviewing the footage for the third time. In 15 years of investigating police misconduct, she had rarely seen such clear, incontrovertible evidence of intentional abuse. Further damning evidence emerged from the coffee temperature analysis. The liquid, measuring 140 degrees F, was warm enough to potentially cause burns. Sullivan's choice of lukewarm coffee suggested a perverse calculation to inflict humiliation and harm without leaving obvious, easily traceable physical injury. But Detective Carter's most explosive discovery came from Sullivan's phone records and text messages. What she found laid bare a pattern of racial animus that transcended a single incident, revealing a chilling mindset. A text from Sullivan to Officer Davis, 2 hours before the assault. Another night watching the courthouse. These people think they run everything. Time to remind them who has the real power. A text to Officer Martinez, 30 minutes after the assault. Taught another entitled some respect today. Coffee works better than words sometimes. And a text to Officer Kim the following day, after being contacted by Internal Affairs. These courthouse parasites don't know when to quit. The messages weren't just racist. They unveiled a calculated belief that assault was a legitimate tool for maintaining what Sullivan perceived as the proper social order. He wasn't merely biased. He was a predator who weaponized his badge to terrorize civilians he deemed inferior. Confronted with the irrefutable security footage and his own damning text messages, Officer Johnson, Sullivan's patrol partner, finally broke. His fabricated story collapsed. "Look, I didn't want to lie, but Sullivan said it was just a misunderstanding," Johnson admitted, his voice trembling. "When I got to the parking lot, he told me this woman had bumped into him and spilled his coffee, but I never actually saw what happened." Johnson's confession unleashed a torrent of truth. Sullivan has this thing about courthouse people, especially black women. He calls them entitled and uppity. He's always talking about putting them in their place. I should have said something years ago. This revelation spurred Detective Carter to dig deeper into Sullivan's history, unearthing a horror show of systematic abuse. The 12 previous complaints were not isolated incidents, but a deliberate pattern of targeting vulnerable civilians. Mrs. Dorothy Jenkins, the 67-year-old whose groceries Sullivan had accidentally knocked down, wept with relief when Detective Carter contacted her. "I knew he did it on purpose, but who was going to believe me over a police officer? I'm just an old black woman trying to get home with her shopping." Marcus Thompson, the 24-year-old on whom Sullivan had poured a drink, felt a profound vindication. He looked me right in the eye when he did it, like he was daring me to say something. Then he smiled when I filed the complaint like he knew nothing would happen. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the pediatrician shoved against her car, was furious. "I have medical training. I know the difference between an accident and an assault." He pushed me deliberately, then had the audacity to claim he was helping me. Each victim's story echoed the same chilling pattern: deliberate physical contact disguised as accidents, racist language masked as authority, and complaints systematically dismissed by a system that implicitly chose to believe its officers over the citizens they were sworn to serve. The final damning piece of evidence came from Sullivan's training records. He had attended multiple seminars on de-escalation and cultural sensitivity. This was not the result of poor training or misunderstanding. His actions were conscious choices to abuse his power, to inflict harm under the guise of authority. Police Chief Morrison was summoned for an emergency meeting as the full scope of Sullivan's misconduct became inescapably clear. Faced with video evidence, racist text messages, witness testimony, and a pattern spanning 5 years, he had no choice but to recommend immediate suspension and a federal investigation. "This is a catastrophic failure of our oversight systems," Chief Morrison admitted to Detective Carter. "How did 12 complaints get dismissed without proper investigation? How did this pattern go unnoticed for 5 years?" The answer was stark and uncomfortable. The system had been inadvertently designed to protect officers like Sullivan, not the civilians they were sworn to serve. Complaints from black citizens were routinely minimized, witnesses dismissed as biased, and officers afforded the benefit of every doubt. As Detective Carter compiled her final report, she understood this case would be a watershed moment. The victim's identity remained officially unknown to Sullivan, but her professional handling of the situation and the quality of evidence she had provided pointed to someone with serious legal training. Whoever she was, she had just handed the department the most comprehensive police misconduct case in its history. Sullivan remained confident, convinced his 15-year career and clean record would protect him. He remained blissfully ignorant that his victim had access to federal databases, that security cameras had captured his assault, and that his own text messages had sealed his fate. Most importantly, he had no clue that the woman he had humiliated was about to become the federal judge who would oversee his complete destruction. Friday morning, 9:00 a.m., Officer Marcus Sullivan strode through the federal courthouse doors, still cloaked in arrogance. The investigation had escalated to federal jurisdiction, but he remained outwardly cocky. "Just another dog and pony show," he scoffed to his attorney, David Morrison, as they navigated unfamiliar corridors. 15 years on the force. They won't throw that away over spilled coffee." Morrison, however, looked visibly worried. "Marcus, the evidence is damning. We should consider a plea." Sullivan scoffed again. "For what? An accident with some entitled courthouse worker? Please." They followed a federal marshal past portraits of distinguished judges, symbols of a power Sullivan had never respected. He barely glanced at them, maintaining his swagger, unaware he was walking toward the most humiliating moment of his life. "Federal Courtroom 3A," the marshal announced, opening doors to reveal a stately room with mahogany paneling and the federal seal emblazoned behind the judge's bench. Sullivan expected a routine hearing, perhaps a preliminary review. Instead, he found himself in the formal, imposing setting where federal justice was dispensed. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Amara Williams," the bailiff announced. Sullivan barely registered the command, focused on his prepared justifications, remaining seated until his lawyer's firm grip on his arm compelled him to stand. Only then did Sullivan look toward the bench. The woman entering wore black judicial robes, but something about her was disturbingly familiar. As she took her seat, Sullivan's brain struggled to process the image, the robes, the gravitas, the calm, familiar expression. Then recognition hit him like a physical blow, stripping him of all color and composure. "Wait." Sullivan's voice came out strangled, barely a whisper. You're the woman from the parking lot." Judge Amara Williams looked down from the federal bench, her expression as serene as it had been when coffee dripped from her coat. The transformation was stunning, from perceived powerless civilian to one of the most powerful figures in American justice. "Officer Sullivan," Judge Williams began, her voice resonating with federal judicial authority, "you poured coffee on a sitting federal judge. You called a Harvard Law graduate and 15-year veteran of the federal bench courthouse trash." The words hit Sullivan like a physical assault. Color drained from his face, his mouth opened soundlessly, all his bravado evaporating. Around the courtroom, a collective gasp affirmed the catastrophic implications of his mistake. His lawyer, David Morrison, closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping in a defeated acknowledgement of his client's spectacular career suicide. "Your Honor," Morrison began shakily, "my client had no idea of your identity." "That's precisely the problem," Judge Williams replied calmly, her quiet authority filling the courtroom. "Officer Sullivan didn't assault me because he knew I was a judge. He assaulted me because he assumed I was powerless. He saw a black woman and decided she needed to be put in her place." Everyone understood they were witnessing something extraordinary, not just a spectacular error revealed, but hidden power displayed in its full, majestic force. "The question isn't whether Officer Sullivan would have behaved differently knowing my position. The question is why he felt entitled to assault any civilian, regardless of status." Sullivan found his voice, barely audible. I didn't know. If I had known you were a federal judge." Judge Williams finished his sentence, her gaze unwavering. "Would assault be acceptable if I were a defense attorney, a court clerk, a janitor, any citizen walking to work?" The questions hung in the air, driving home the fundamental injustice of Sullivan's actions and assumptions. His career, his pension, his freedom. Everything crumbled as he stood before the woman he'd humiliated, who now held his fate. The parking lot where he'd felt so powerful seemed like a distant, irrelevant universe compared to this courtroom where real power resided. Judge Williams, true to her judicial ethics, recused herself from presiding over the actual case due to being the victim. But her presence on that bench, her initial, powerful revelation, had sent an unmistakable message. Justice had found its voice, and it belonged to the woman Sullivan had tried to silence with coffee and contempt. 1 week later, visiting federal judge Roberto Martinez presided over Sullivan's formal hearing, with Judge Williams, having properly recused herself, seated in the witness section. What followed was a methodical, surgical dissection of 15 years of racially motivated abuse that had been hidden in plain sight. The federal prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Carter, began with precision. Officer Sullivan, you've testified this was an isolated incident, a misunderstanding. Let's examine that claim. Sullivan, visibly shaken since discovering his victim's true identity, attempted to maintain composure. Yes, ma'am. Just an unfortunate accident that got blown out of proportion. An accident? Prosecutor Carter pulled out a thick file. Let's discuss your pattern of accidents involving black civilians over the past 5 years. Sullivan's attorney objected, but Judge Martinez overruled, affirming the direct relevance of the pattern to determining whether this was an isolated incident or part of systematic civil rights violations. Mrs. Dorothy Jenkins, age 67, Carter began, her voice unwavering. You knocked groceries from her hands during a jaywalking stop. Your report claimed she resisted and the bags fell accidentally. Do you remember Mrs. Jenkins, Officer Sullivan? Sullivan shifted uncomfortably. Vaguely. Like I said, she was uncooperative. Uncooperative? Carter turned to the gallery. Mrs. Jenkins, would you please stand? A dignified, elderly woman rose from the back of the courtroom. Mrs. Jenkins, please tell the court what Officer Sullivan said when he knocked your groceries down. Her voice was clear and strong. He said, "Watch yourself, Grandma. These streets aren't for your kind after dark." Then he deliberately swung his arm and scattered my groceries across the sidewalk. Sullivan's face flushed. That's not... She's misremembering. Marcus Thompson, age 24, traffic stop. Carter continued relentlessly. You poured your drink on him, claiming he knocked the beverage from your hand during aggressive movement. Mr. Thompson, please stand. A young man in a business suit stood. Officer Sullivan looked me in the eye and said, You need to learn some respect for authority, boy. Then he dumped his entire Gatorade on my shirt and told me to drive away before he found something to arrest me for. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, pediatrician, parking violation. Carter's voice gained intensity. You shoved her against her car, claiming she stumbled backward and you were helping steady her. Dr. Mitchell, a professional woman in medical scrubs, stood. Officer Sullivan pushed me so hard against my car that I had bruises for a week. He said, Doctors think they're better than everyone else. You're not special here. One by one, Sullivan's victims stood and shared their stories. Each account followed the same insidious pattern: deliberate physical contact, racist language, and official reports that transformed assault into accident. The cumulative effect was devastating. Sullivan's attorney attempted damage control. Your Honor, these are isolated incidents spread over years. 12 incidents in 5 years, Carter interrupted, her voice sharp. All involving black civilians, all involving deliberate physical contact, all dismissed or reduced by a system that chose to believe Officer Sullivan over his victims. Judge Martinez leaned forward. Officer Sullivan, how do you explain this pattern? Sullivan's composure finally cracked. These people, they don't understand how law enforcement works. Sometimes you have to establish authority. They were all being difficult, uncooperative. Uncooperative? Carter repeated the word like a weapon. Mrs. Jenkins was walking home with groceries. Mr. Thompson was sitting in his legally parked car. Dr. Mitchell was putting money in a parking meter. What exactly were they being uncooperative about? He stammered, They had attitudes. They didn't show proper respect. Proper respect? Carter turned to Judge Williams in the gallery. Officer Sullivan, what proper respect did Judge Williams fail to show when she was walking to work? The question hung in the air like a blade. Sullivan had painted himself into a corner with no escape. I didn't know she was a judge. So, assault is acceptable as long as the victim isn't a federal judge? Your testimony suggests you believe you have the right to physically attack civilians who don't show you what you consider proper respect. Sullivan's 15-year career unraveled in real time. Each question exposed another layer of abuse, another victim silenced by a system designed to protect officers over civilians. Police Chief Morrison took the stand, forced to admit that Sullivan's complaints had been routinely dismissed without proper investigation. We failed these victims. We failed the community. Officer Sullivan's pattern should have been stopped years ago. The hearing revealed not just one officer's racism, but an entire system's complicity in allowing abuse to continue unchecked. Sullivan's text messages were read aloud, his victims given voices they'd been denied for years, and his pattern of targeting those he perceived as powerless was exposed in devastating detail. By the time cross-examination concluded, Sullivan's defense lay in ruins. His attorney could only watch as years of hidden abuse were dragged into the light, and his client's career ended not with honors, but with federal charges that would follow him forever. The federal courtroom was packed as prosecutor Sarah Carter rose for her closing argument. In the gallery sat 12 victims of Sullivan's abuse, Judge Williams among them, and dozens of community members who had come to witness justice finally served. The weight of 15 years of ignored complaints and dismissed concerns filled the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carter began, her voice carrying the authority of the federal government, "this case is about more than one officer's misconduct. This is about a systematic pattern of civil rights violations that was allowed to flourish because the victims were black and their voices were ignored." Sullivan sat at the defense table, his earlier arrogance replaced by the hollow look of a man watching his life crumble. His attorney had advised him to accept a plea deal, but Sullivan's pride had prevented him from admitting guilt. Now, he faced the full force of federal prosecution. Officer Marcus Sullivan stands accused of violating 18 U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. But the evidence shows this wasn't a single incident. This was a career-long pattern of using his badge to terrorize civilians he deemed inferior. Carter walked toward the jury, her voice gaining intensity. The defendant poured coffee on federal judge Amara Williams, not because he knew she was a judge, but because he assumed she was powerless. He saw a black woman and decided she needed to be humiliated. This assumption of powerlessness drove 15 years of abuse. The prosecutor turned to face Sullivan directly. 12 victims over 5 years, all black civilians, all subjected to deliberate physical contact disguised as accidents, all filing complaints that were systematically dismissed by a department more interested in protecting officers than citizens. Judge Martinez maintained perfect judicial composure, but the gravity of the case was evident in his measured attention to every word. "The evidence is overwhelming," Carter continued. "Security footage showing deliberate assault, text messages revealing racial animus, witness testimony exposing a pattern of abuse, and Officer Sullivan's own words in this courtroom admitting he believed these citizens needed to show him proper respect." She paused, letting the implications sink in. Proper respect, as if respect is something that can be beaten into people with coffee, with drinks, with physical intimidation, as if a badge grants the right to assault civilians who don't demonstrate sufficient subservience. The impact on the gallery was visible. Mrs. Jenkins wiped tears from her eyes. Marcus Thompson clenched his fists. Dr. Sarah Mitchell nodded grimly. Each victim had waited years for this moment of accountability. Sullivan's attorney, David Morrison, attempted a final defense. "Officers make split-second decisions under pressure. My client made mistakes, but they weren't motivated by racial hatred. These were lapses in judgment, not federal crimes." Judge Martinez listened respectfully, but the defense felt hollow against the mountain of evidence. Morrison continued, Officer Sullivan has served his community for 15 years. One moment of poor judgment shouldn't destroy an entire career. Carter rose for her rebuttal, her voice sharp with controlled anger. One moment, 12 documented incidents over 5 years isn't one moment. It's a pattern. A career built on terrorizing citizens whose only crime was existing while black in Officer Sullivan's presence. She turned to address the broader implications. This case sends a message that badges don't grant immunity from consequences, that federal civil rights laws have meaning, that victims who were ignored for years finally have a voice that matters. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Martinez prepared to deliver his verdict. Sullivan's fate hung in the balance, along with a message about whether police accountability was real or just another empty promise. Officer Marcus Sullivan, Judge Martinez began, his voice carrying the full weight of federal authority. You have been found guilty on all charges of civil rights violations under federal law. The words hit Sullivan like physical blows. His shoulders sagged as the reality of federal convictions sank in. The evidence demonstrates a systematic pattern of racially motivated abuse spanning 5 years. You used your position of authority to terrorize citizens based on their race, then relied on institutional protection to avoid consequences. Judge Martinez continued, his tone growing sterner. Federal conviction for civil rights violations under color of law carries serious penalties. You are sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, forfeiture of all pension benefits, and permanent prohibition from law enforcement employment. The gallery erupted in quiet, dignified satisfaction. Justice had finally been served after years of institutional failure. Additionally, Judge Martinez added, this court recommends a comprehensive federal investigation into the police department's handling of misconduct complaints. The systematic dismissal of legitimate grievances enabled Officer Sullivan's pattern of abuse. Police Chief Morrison, present for the verdict, looked visibly shaken. The institutional reckoning was just beginning. Judge Williams remained composed throughout the proceedings, but her presence sent an unmistakable message. The woman Sullivan had tried to humiliate with coffee and racial slurs had become the catalyst for federal accountability that would change police training nationwide. As Sullivan was led away in handcuffs, the victims he had terrorized finally felt vindicated. Mrs. Jenkins smiled through her tears. Marcus Thompson exhaled deeply. Dr. Sarah Mitchell nodded with satisfaction. Their complaints, dismissed for years, had finally resulted in justice. The federal conviction meant Sullivan would serve real prison time, not the administrative leave and transfers that typically followed police misconduct. His name would become a case study in civil rights violations, a cautionary tale taught in law enforcement academies across the country. But perhaps most importantly, 12 victims who had been told their experiences didn't matter finally heard the federal government declare that their civil rights had value, their dignity deserved protection, and their voices would be heard. Officer Marcus Sullivan entered federal prison 3 months later, serving as a stark reminder that no badge grants immunity from accountability when civil rights violations reach federal court. His 15-year career of abuse had ended with federal conviction, institutional reform, and a message that justice, however delayed, would ultimately prevail. 6 months later, Officer Marcus Sullivan began serving his 3-year federal sentence. The man who spent 15 years terrorizing black civilians now wore an orange jumpsuit. His days of wielding a badge to intimidate were over forever. Judge Amara Williams continued her distinguished career, but her impact extended far beyond her courtroom. The coffee-stained coat became preserved evidence, symbolizing how hidden power emerges to deliver justice when least expected. The police department underwent massive reforms. Chief Morrison implemented new accountability measures. Bias training became mandatory, and complaint investigations transferred to independent civilian oversight. Sullivan's abuse pattern had exposed systemic failures that could no longer be ignored. Most importantly, 12 silenced victims found their voices amplified nationwide. Mrs. Dorothy Jenkins became an advocate for elderly citizens' rights. Marcus Thompson started a community organization supporting young men targeted by police misconduct. Dr. Sarah Mitchell testified before Congress about racial profiling. Their stories, once dismissed as isolated complaints, became the foundation for federal legislation strengthening civil rights protections. Sullivan's victims transformed from powerless targets into powerful voices for change. The case became required reading in law schools nationwide. Harvard Law School created the Amara Williams Fellowship for Civil Rights Students, its description proudly stating, "Justice delayed is not justice denied when courage meets opportunity." The coffee shop outside the courthouse, inspired by Judge Williams's dignity under assault, created the Justice Blend, bold, strong, and impossible to ignore, donating profits to legal aid organizations serving marginalized communities. Sullivan's story became a cautionary tale in police academies, reminding officers that badges grant authority to serve, not license to abuse. His text messages and testimony were used in training programs, vividly demonstrating how racial bias corrupts law enforcement. For Judge Williams, the incident reinforced her mother's timeless lesson about using power to protect the powerless. She continued hearing cases with the same measured dignity shown in that parking lot, never forgetting that justice works best when it's unexpected and absolute. The parking lot where Sullivan felt so powerful remained physically unchanged, but its meaning was transformed. Federal courthouse employees now pointed it out to visitors, sharing how one officer's arrogant assumption of powerlessness led to his complete downfall. Sullivan's prison sentence would end eventually, but federal conviction meant permanent prohibition from law enforcement. The badge that protected him for 15 years was gone forever, replaced by a criminal record that would follow him for life. This story proves justice isn't about revenge, it's about accountability. It's about ensuring power can't hide behind badges and dignity can't be stolen with coffee and contempt. Everyday people face situations where power seems stacked against them, but as Judge Amara Williams demonstrated, real power often lies hidden, waiting for the right moment to emerge and restore balance to an unjust world.